Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a conceptual expedition into the very architecture of our minds.
That's a good way to put it.
We're looking at how we form thoughts about what we ought to do. It's a deep dive into philosophy for sure, but I think it has these massive practical stakes.
It absolutely does.
Because we're trying to figure out if the thought, I should exercise right now, really comes from the same mental source as a huge universal rule, like human beings must always keep their promises.
That's right. Our goal today is to explore a framework known as practical cognitivism. And this view, it's pretty bold. It doesn't just treat our practical reason, our ability to decide what to do, as some kind of mechanism.
Like a calculator in our heads.
Exactly. It's not just a tool. The view says our practical reason is the self-conscious will itself.
Well, will is the reason.
The will is the reason. And if that's true, then every single thought we have about what we should do, whether it's this tiny personal commitment or a grand moral law, it all has to fit together. It has to be unified within that single structure.
And fitting them together as well. It's incredibly difficult, which brings us straight to the central puzzle we're going to be wrestling with.
The paradox.
The paradox of what philosophers call generic normative thoughts, or, practical principles. Just think of any general rule you live by.
People should pay their taxes.
Or one ought to be kind to strangers. That kind of thought.
Yeah. And that kind of generic thought is a philosophical hybrid. And that's what makes it so confusing. Let's take a concrete example. Say, the principle. Human beings should exercise regularly.
Okay.
When you think that principle, and then you spend the entire evening on the couch, without a good excuse, that failure feels very personal.
Right. It feels immediate. It's like a failure of my will.
It feels like you've been practically irrational. And that feeling, that pull, suggests the principle is acting like an intention.
I get that. It's like a promise I made to myself, and I'm now actively breaking it. But here's the other side of it. If I state that same principle, human beings should exercise regularly, and then I look out the window and see my neighbor failing to exercise, I am not irrational at all.
Not in the slightest.
I might, judge their behavior, sure, but my own mental state is perfectly fine. The thought seems universal, totally independent of my own agency, and that makes it look exactly like an objective, evaluative belief.
And that's the impossible balancing act we're talking about. Intentions and beliefs are defined by philosophers as having fundamentally distinct properties. An intention is about making something happen.
Making something actual.
A belief is about representing what is actual. A single thought, logically, just cannot be both of those things at the same time.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out what these generic thoughts really are at their core, and how they manage to bridge these two completely different mental worlds to form a unified system of oughts that's all grounded in the will.
Okay, so let's start at the absolute bottom floor. We have to define the foundation of this whole framework, practical cognitivism. We need to understand practical reason, not as a function, but as a capacity.
Exactly. And when we say capacity, we're talking about a potentiality. A very specific kind of potentiality to act. And this is crucial because any capacity, just by its nature, immediately establishes its own standards.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Think about the capacity to play the piano. The very existence of that capacity dictates standards for its development. The difference between a novice just awkwardly hitting keys and a virtuoso concert pianist.
Okay, so that's the development. And it also sets standards for its exercise, right? Right. When the pianist successfully plays a difficult piece, they've met the standard of successful exercise. When they hit a wrong note, they fail. The very same logic applies to our practical reason.
And if practical reason is, as the theory says, the self-conscious will, then our actions, our successful actions, are not just some side effect of a mental computation.
No, they are the manifestation of that capacity. The action is the reason in motion. And that self-conscious part is absolutely key. Our actions are volitional. It means that when we act, we are expressing our reason, which is why we hold ourselves and, others responsible for them.
That distinction is so important. Actions are the manifestation, not just the result. That's what separates us from, say, a very clever dog fetching a stick.
That's a perfect example. The dog is acting on instinct, on training, but we act based on reflection and rational choice.
And that reflection brings in this other concept, the rational basis.
The rational basis, yes. A self-conscious capacity like reason is defined by the fact that its proper exercise includes these rational bases. When I choose to go to the store, I'm acting because of a reason. Maybe I need milk, or maybe I just want to get some fresh air.
That because is the rational basis.
It is. And grasping that basis is inherent to the exercise of my will. It's not just an explanation I cook up later to justify what I did. It's actually part of the action structure from the very beginning.
Unlike, say, a purely causal explanation, like why my body temperature rises when I exercise, that's an explanation about me, but I don't need to grasp that reason to perform the action of running.
Exactly. But you do need to grasp the reason for running to be running rationally. That's the difference. So now we can use that foundation to draw this really critical distinction, the one between the two forms of self-conscious reason, theoretical and practical.
Okay, let's start with theoretical reason. What's the fundamental question it's trying to answer?
It's always answering one question: what is the case? Its entire function is to accurately represent what is actual in the world. You can think of it as a capacity that's dedicated to truth, to accurate mapping.
And because of that, its successful exercise must answer to the world. The world is sovereign, you could say.
The world is sovereign. If I believe it's raining and then I step outside and find it sunny, what happens?
I have to revise my belief. My thought is subservient to external reality.
Perfectly put.
Uh.
And the product of that successful theoretical exercise is a belief. A belief is essentially a thought state that is independent of the object it represents. I can believe the sun is hot, whether or not I am currently feeling its heat.
So practical reason must be the conceptual mirror image of all of this. What question does it answer?
It answers what to do. Its function is the complete reverse of theoretical reason. It's not about representing what is actual. It's about making actual what it represents.
So instead of just mapping the territory, it's actively redrawing the map.
You're redrawing the map. And this completely changes the relationship to the world. If I intend to bake a cake, and then I discover the grocery store is closed.
I don't necessarily just give up the intention right away. I might decide to drive to a different store or order the ingredients online.
Exactly. The world's resistance prompts you to change the means, but not necessarily the end. My exercise of practical reason does not answer to the world in that passive way my beliefs do.
The intention holds steady. It insists on being realized.
It insists. The standard for success is realizing the intention through action. So the proper exercise results in a thought and an act. The intention is realized, and crucially, the person, the subject, understands that the act is the realization of the intention. This is what makes intention the fundamental primary state of practical reason.
So since intention is this fundamental practical state, it must be governed by some kind of objective standards for correctness.
It has to be. And these are the two correlative rules of practical rationality. They are the objective conditions for the success of any exercise of the will.
Let's take the first one.
The first rule is the realizability rule. This dictates that you must only intend what you can actually do. The intention must be capable of being brought about by your agency.
So this rule is what prevents necessarily ill-formed intentions. It's not about whether I fail to lift a heavy box because I'm not strong enough. That's a contingent failure, a failure in the world.
That's a contingent failure. This is about intentions that are structurally, logically impossible to complete.
Right.
Precisely. If I form the intention to draw a square without corners, or maybe I intend to become invisible simply by snapping my fingers and wishing for it, those intentions are ill-formed a priori before I even try.
Because nothing could possibly count as bringing them about through my agency. It doesn't matter how skilled or committed I am.
Exactly. They violate the very possibility condition of intention.
Yeah.
So the rule basically establishes the proper domain of your agency.
Okay, so the realizability rule sets the boundary. Only things within my sphere of action are valid intentions. What about the second rule?
That's the instrumental rule. A bit more straightforward. You must take sufficient means to your end. Or, put even more simply, you must do what you intend. This rule governs the successful execution of a well-formed intention.
So if I intend to write a best-selling novel, and I actually sit down every day and type 5,000 words, I am succeeding in the exercise of that intention.
You're meeting the standard.
But if I intend to write the novel, and then I just watch television for 3 years straight, I have failed the exercise, even if the intention itself was perfectly well-formed and realizable.
You've failed. And we have to emphasize that these are the objective rules. They define whether the exercise succeeded or failed, regardless of what I might subjectively believe about my chances.
So I could genuinely believe I had sufficient means to finish the novel, only to find out I missed a crucial, non-negotiable deadline. The failure is still objective, even if I was subjectively trying my best.
The failure is objective. Your will did not succeed in making its object actual. Now, because our capacity is self-conscious, there have to be subjective correlates, right? Rules linked to criticism and blame.
Right, like, I shouldn't intend to do something if I believe I cannot do it. That seems like a good personal rule.
It is. Subjective rules absolutely exist, and they're tied to avoiding self-criticism or blame from others. But the core focus of practical reason is always the objective success of the action. We are agents who strive to realize things in the world. The objective rules, realizability and instrumental, are the ones that define the correctness conditions for that success. They are what guide what a rational being ought to pursue.
So to just quickly summarize where we are in part one, practical reason is the self-conscious will. Intentions are its fundamental output, and those intentions are bound by these objective rules about possibility and realization.
That's our anchor.
It is, and we'll need it as we venture into this very messy world of oughts. Okay, let's take the framework we just built, which is grounded entirely in this idea of the self-conscious intention, and now try to apply it to the diversity of specific normative thoughts we have.
Right. These are the particular judgments we make all the time. I should call my mother today, or he should have repaid that loan.
The puzzle here is trying to figure out how these different perspectives, first person, second person, past tense, how can they possibly be unified? Because it seems like only the first person thought mandates immediate action.
And this goes straight back to one of the rules we just established.
The realizability rule.
Absolutely. The first person, present or future thought, the thought, I should act now, is the only one that can possibly fulfill the objective conditions of practical reason. And why?
Because I can only perform my actions. I can only bring about my end state. So this state, this I should, has to be an intention.
It is an intention. And if I don't form it when the reasons are there, or if I form it but then don't act on it, I am practically irrational in the most immediate and fundamental sense.
So that makes the I should intention the foundational practical state for me, for the individual. Now let's contrast that with you should act, or I should have acted yesterday.
Okay. Well, I cannot perform your actions, and I certainly cannot retroactively change the past. So if I think you should keep that promise, that thought cannot possibly be an intention of mine.
Because it would immediately violate the realizability rule. I can't make you act no matter how strongly I believe you should. My will can't reach into your agency.
It can't. So if they aren't intentions, they must be exercises of the other kind of reason. Right?
Yeah, they must be exercises of theoretical reason.
They are. They're evaluative beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
They are exercises of theoretical reason about practical reason. So when I judge that you should keep that promise, I am forming a belief about the correctness of the intention that you should be forming.
And when I think, I should have exercised yesterday, I'm forming a belief about the correctness of the intention I failed to form or act on 24 hours ago.
Exactly. So the whole class of specific normative thoughts is unified, but not because they're all the same type of mental state. They're not all intentions.
They're unified through a relationship of what the sources call explanatory dependence.
That is the crucial insight. The intention is the gold standard. It's the primary state. The very possibility of having an evaluative belief about an action, believing that something is the correct thing for someone to intend, is entirely grounded in the possibility of that intention existing in the first place.
So the correctness conditions for my belief about your action are derived from the objective realizability and instrumental rules that govern your intention.
Precisely. The belief is correct only if the corresponding intention would be correct. So we have this very clear dependent hierarchy.
Okay, so intentions are the primary practical state, and these evaluative beliefs are a secondary reflective state. And they're all unified because they all orbit the necessary conditions of intention.
You've got it.
This seems to set us up perfectly to finally solve the bigger mystery of those generic thoughts. Okay, let's bring back our practical principle. Human beings should exercise regularly. If we try to slot this into the framework we've just built, we hit a wall instantly.
We hit it hard. We already established it can't be a specific intention because that violates realizability. I can't exercise for all human beings.
Right, and if it were just an evaluative belief, like the ones we just discussed, it wouldn't explain why I feel practically irrational when I fail to act on it. A belief doesn't have that kind of volitional pull.
And that feeling, that pull on my will when I fail, combined with the universal applicability when you fail, that's the generality puzzle.
Yeah.
We need to find a mental state that can apply universally while simultaneously maintaining the possibility of this immediate, specific, practical failure that's tied to the agent's own will.
So the intuitive common sense answer, what we were calling the simple belief model, is very tempting here.
It's very tempting.
It just suggests that a generic thought is a general theoretical premise. It's like all objects dropped near the Earth fall at 9.8 meters per second squared, but for actions.
Exactly. The model goes like this. I have the general principle, eligible voters should vote. That's premise 1. Then I have a separate theoretical premise. I am an eligible voter. That's premise 2.
And I just combine them in a simple syllogism, and I infer the specific instruction. Therefore, I should vote.
It seems so logical.
Yeah.
So clean.
But the sources we're looking at argue that this model fails completely, and it fails on two critical fronts, both related to the nature of practical irrationality.
Let's take the first one. Problem 1. It fails to capture the true nature of practical irrationality. If my failure to act on that derived thought, I should vote, is simply because I missed the minor premise.
Like, say I genuinely forgot that the legal definition of an eligible voter included me. I just made a mistake about the facts.
Right. Then my resulting failure is merely theoretical irrationality. I've made a logical mistake or I've made an epistemic error. I have a lack of knowledge.
But the whole philosophical challenge here is that when I accept a moral principle and then consciously disregard it, the irrationality feels fundamentally practical. It feels like a failure of the will, a volitional gap.
It's a different kind of error entirely. If I miss a theoretical premise, I need correction. I need a reminder. Hey, you know you're registered to vote, right? But if I disregard a known principle,
I need ethical correction. Or maybe a change of heart. The simple belief model reduces a failure of character to a simple failure of logic.
and that takes us to the even deeper issue with the model. Problem 2, the impossibility of alienation.
Alienation, what do we mean by that here?
The simple belief model suggests that I can accept the principle, say, human beings should keep promises, while remaining completely alienated from it. Meaning, I don't recognize its relevance to me because I haven't yet connected the dots. I haven't made the inference that I am a human being.
Which sounds absurd on its face.
It is. But the sources argue that to truly accept a practical principle about human beings is immediately to subsume myself under it. The kind of alienation that is maybe possible for eligible voters, where I might genuinely be ignorant of my status, is impossible for human beings.
Why? This feels like the core philosophical punch. We really need to unpack this concept of self-knowledge.
The reason alienation is impossible is that the concept of human being is fundamentally different from all other class concepts we have.
How so?
We don't acquire it empirically in the same way we acquire the concept of eligible voter, which requires me to check birth certificates, residency laws, voting records. It's based on external facts.
Okay, so how do we acquire the concept of human being?
We acquired our own species concept through mere reflection on ourselves. It is the concept of our life form, grasped under the guise of a being that has practical reason.
Whoa, so since our practical reason is self-conscious, every time we exercise it, we are implicitly deploying this very concept.
That's the idea. So when I sit here and consciously form an intention to go get a coffee, or when I reflect on why I shouldn't tell a lie, I am simultaneously and implicitly exercising the concept of my own species as the kind of entity that is capable of this self-conscious activity.
That is a profound thought. It means you cannot logically engage in self-conscious thought without deploying the concept of the kind of being you are.
Exactly. Therefore, when I formulate the generic thought, human beings should keep promises, I cannot possibly miss the fact that the thought concerns me among others. The self-reference is a priori. It's known through reflection, not through looking in a mirror or checking my DNA.
Let's spend some more time on the detailed argument for this. I know it's associated with philosophers like Thompson and Ordonez Angulo because it formalizes this claim of unique access. This feels like one of the most compelling parts of the whole theory.
It is. The argument rests on this deep connection between an activity and the life form that performs it. We start with the established premises of self-consciousness. So first, when you deploy a self-conscious thought like forming an intention or believing something on a rational basis, you must represent yourself as thinking.
You're aware of your own mental activity.
You are. Second, representing yourself as thinking is representing one of your activities. It's something you do.
Okay, that makes sense. And since both biology and philosophy would agree that any activity of an animal has to be understood in the context of its specific life form.
Right, the way a bird flies, a fish swims, or a human reasons.
Then the argument continues. Representing an organism's activities entails representing its life form.
This logically leads us to the big conclusion. When you deploy a self-conscious thought, you must be representing your own life form. Because my life form happens to be human, deploying a self-conscious thought entails deploying the concept human.
And here's the final critical step for the a priori claim. Since deploying a self-conscious thought doesn't require any empirical content, I don't need to look in a mirror or check my ID to know that I'm thinking, then deploying the concept human also doesn't need to involve empirical content.
Therefore, the concept of human is a priori. It's available to me just through reflection. Now, as the source material notes, there was a critique of this. People brought up, rational Martians.
Right. A Martian can deploy a self-conscious thought, but they wouldn't be deploying the concept human. So if the argument was strictly that every rational being deploys the concept human, it would be false.
It would. But the core insight survives that critique. It just needs a small refinement. The conclusion isn't that human is a priori for everyone in the universe.
The conclusion is that the concept of one's own species, be it human, Martian, or something else, is a priori for that individual.
Exactly. It's a unique reflexive access that's built into rationality itself. When I think of the concept that defines my rational kind, I don't need science or observation. I simply reflect on my own capacity to reason.
And this philosophical work is what ultimately breaks the simple belief model. Since I can't be alienated from the concept of being human, the jump from human beings should exercise to I should exercise is immediate and volitional.
It's not a two-step logical inference I might forget to make.
Which means the irrationality associated with ignoring the generic thought is therefore practical. It's a failure of the will, not a mistaken logic.
And now that we've established what generic thoughts are not, they're not simple intentions, they're not simple beliefs, we can finally introduce the two roles that explain what they are.
We spent a lot of time defining what an intention is and what a belief is. So now we're introducing a third type of state that's necessary for this whole structure to work: the disposition of the will.
That's right. And the primary role of a practical principle, like human beings must be just, is to be a settled disposition of the will.
What does that mean exactly? A disposition?
Think of it this way.
Ah.
The disposition constitutes the state of development of your practical reason. It's the current baseline of your character. And this is absolutely critical because practical reason isn't some static on-off switch. It's a developing capacity.
Let's go back to that capacity analogy we used earlier, the ability to walk or speak. A newborn has the capacity to walk, but it is totally undeveloped.
Right. An adult has the capacity fully developed.
Mm.
An elderly person might have that same capacity, but it's slightly diminished. The success criteria and the possibilities for action shift depending on the state of development of the capacity.
So our practical reason is the same. An undeveloped will, maybe in a child, might only be capable of acting on very basic desires.
Whereas a practically wise adult can intend and act on incredibly complex, long-term, altruistic, rational basis. The state of development of your will sets the standards for its exercises and, in a way, dictates which actions are even currently possible for you.
And the full state of development, the gold standard, is known as practical wisdom. So the virtues, justice, courage, kindness, they are essentially the specific ways that wisdom manifests.
Yes. The virtues are defined as sensitivities. They are stable dispositions to intend and act on certain kinds of rational bases.
Mm-hmm.
If I accept the principle of beneficence, that human beings should help those in need, it means I have developed a disposition in my will that makes properties related to need immediately salient to me. They pop out as reasons for action.
So to accept a practical principle isn't just to nod your head and agree with it intellectually.
Not at all. It is fundamentally to embody it as a disposition. It becomes part of your character. It becomes a readiness to act when the right circumstances arise.
We have to be really careful here not to confuse this settled disposition with a generic intention. Why is it conceptually impossible for a practical principle to be a generic intention, like me intending to always tell the truth in every future situation?
It goes back to the realizability rule we established right at the beginning. A generic intention, intending to do something indefinitely many times, potentially forever, could never be brought to completion.
Right. I can never get to a point where I can say, I have successfully completed my intention to always tell the truth. There's always one more chance to lie.
So it's necessarily ill-formed. It violates the objective conditions for what an intention is. But a disposition completely bypasses this constraint because it functions differently in time.
Oh, so?
A disposition is not an object that's seeking its own realization and completion. It is a readiness to manifest when appropriate conditions are met. It doesn't bring itself to completion. Rather, it is expressed indefinitely many times in individual specific intentions and actions.
So it's the stable condition of the will that grounds the possibility of all these specific well-formed intentions.
Exactly. And this distinction is a huge relief for anyone who's ever tried to maintain a New Year's resolution.
Huh, right. I don't need to form a necessarily ill-formed intention to always exercise. I just need to cultivate the disposition of being a regular exerciser in my character.
And that settled disposition is what finally allows us to explain that feeling of practical irrationality when we fail to act on a general principle. It forces us to distinguish between two very different kinds of failure of the will.
Okay, so we need to contrast failure in an exercise, which is akrasia, with failure to exercise.
Let's start with akrasia, or weakness of will. This is a failure in a specific exercise. I form the specific intention. I think to myself, I should go for a run right now, but then I fail to competently realize it.
I lace up my shoes, I walk to the door, and then I get distracted by an email and I sit down on the couch instead.
Right. There's a manifest gap between your specific thought and your action. The intention was present, but it's poorly executed.
Okay, now let's consider the failure associated with generic principles. I accept that human beings should exercise regularly. It's 5 p.m., the perfect time to act, but I am sitting on the couch not even thinking about exercise. I completely fail to even register the rational basis for action.
That's the failure to exercise. You're in a situation that licenses action, but you miss the basis entirely. You neither form the specific intention, nor do you act.
So why is this still practically irrational, even without the specific intention being formed?
Because you possess the disposition. You have developed your will enough to know the principle. You have, at least partially, embodied it in your character.
Yeah.
Your failure to act reveals a gap between your settled practical wisdom, the disposition, and the current exercise of your reason in that moment.
So I should have registered the basis for action because my character, theoretically, embodies the principle that recognizes that basis.
Your character knows better, so to speak. This makes the slacker on the couch a case of failure to exercise. They know they should be the kind of person who exercises, but they fail to manifest that character trait in that moment.
And this distinction is really critical for understanding moral character, isn't it? Like the difference between an imperfectly just person and a viciously unjust person.
A huge difference. The viciously corrupt person, who believes, for instance, that wealth accumulation justifies any action, sees someone's poverty as a basis for exploitation. They act unjustly, but they are perfectly rational according to their own perverse set of principles.
Their disposition and their action are in perfect alignment. There is no irrational gap for them.
None at all. Whereas the imperfectly just person is still developing their will. They accept the principle of justice, they embody the disposition, but in a moment of stress or distraction, they might simply fail to notice a small injustice. They might miss the basis for fairness entirely.
So their failure isn't intentional exploitation. It's a failure to exercise the capacity they possess.
And that failure reveals an imperfect state of development. The tension they feel, the guilt, comes from that gap between the character they accept as correct and the character they just manifested.
So role one solves the internal volitional pull. The generic thought is primarily a disposition, a state of my character, and that state dictates why I feel irrational when I fail to express it. Okay, we've established the foundation. The practical principle is a settled disposition. That's role one. Now we need to explore how this disposition translates into the universal statements we share as ethical theory. And that's role two, the derivative function of reflection.
Right. While our capacity for practical reason is primarily about acting, about making things actual, because we are self-conscious agents, we can also step back. We can reflect on our actions and on our capacities. And this reflection is how we develop self-knowledge and ethical understanding.
Let's clarify those two modes again, the engaged mode versus the reflective mode.
In the engaged mode, I am simply acting. I am focused on the object, rescuing the person, keeping the promise, going for the run. I have an implicit grasp of the rational basis for my action. I'm running because of my health, but I'm focused on the pavement in front of me.
Okay, and in the reflective mode?
I step back and I articulate what I was doing and why I was doing it. I make the implicit knowledge explicit. I turn my attention from the world to my own will.
And this reflection is what allows us to create concepts that are unique to self-conscious beings. These are the essentially first personal concepts, like rational basis itself, or intention, or even ought.
We can only formulate and apply these concepts because we exercise practical reason. A non-self-conscious being can never articulate the concept of a rational basis because it can't reflect on its own activity as being motivated by a reason.
So it's through this process of reflecting on our own practical knowledge, on our dispositions and our intentions, that we're able to form theoretical judgments about the proper state of our capacities.
Exactly. And that brings us to role 2. In their secondary, reflective role, generic thoughts become evaluative beliefs about the correctness of the states of development, the character, or the will that all human beings should possess.
Let's use an analogy to keep this clear. Think of a generic causal principle like gravity causes objects to fall. That statement is a theoretical belief. It codifies a relationship in the world.
Right. The belief itself doesn't exert any force, but it describes the force that is exerted by the objects.
So generic normative thoughts function in a similar way in this role.
They do. The statement human beings should keep promises is not an intention. It is a theoretical belief that codifies the correct justificatory relationship between the basis, making a promise, and the resulting action, keeping the promise. It asserts that this relationship should be a disposition of the human will.
This is why Role 2 explains the universal applicability of principles. When I articulate this thought, I'm expressing a generic belief concerning the kind, human beings, and what their will should be. It's applicable indefinitely many times rather than expressing a specific action I am currently trying to bring about.
And crucially, this reflective thought acts as a standard for others. When I criticize you for breaking a promise, I am utilizing this Role 2 evaluative belief to assess the correctness of your specific intention, even though that belief of mine originated from reflecting on my own necessary disposition, which is Role 1.
So the dependence structure is what holds the entire system together. We have to maintain that the possibility and correctness of these evaluative beliefs in Role 2 are entirely dependent on the possibility and correctness of the underlying dispositions of the will in Role 1.
They have to be. The primary function of practical reason is practical. It's to act. Therefore, the knowledge that is embodied in the virtuous person's disposition, in their character, is primary. The correct ethical theory, the stuff we write down in philosophy books, is simply the reflective articulation of that practical knowledge.
So, if a philosopher proposes an ethical theory that fundamentally clashes with the dispositions required for rational action, that theory is, by definition, flawed.
It has to be. The theory must follow the territory, and the territory is the actual practical capacity of human beings.
It kind of reverses the common perception that we learn ethics from a book and then try to apply it to our lives.
It does. This view says we act, we develop character, and then we reflect upon that character to articulate what is correct for our species. It's practical knowledge first, ethical theory second.
But even though it's derivative, Role 2 is still vital for human life. We are imperfect, social beings, and reflection is essential for ethical interaction and for our own development.
Absolutely. It enables all these key social functions: ethical communication, giving advice, criticism of others, and most importantly, self-improvement. Reflection allows us to recognize that our current behavior, proximately, and our character, distally, may both be flawed and in need of revision.
This allows for what the sources call reflexive criticism. I can articulate the principle, human beings must be generous, while simultaneously recognizing that my own character is flawed and only partially embodies that principle. I can judge my own disposition harshly.
And that reflexive criticism is actually a very sophisticated act. The recognition that my character is imperfect is itself an expression of a higher, more developed aspect of my will. It prevents the accusation of insincerity.
How so?
Well, if I criticize myself for being selfish, I'm not being hypocritical about the principle of generosity. I'm actually demonstrating that my developed reason knows the correct disposition, even if my current self falls short of it.
And this distinction between correction and conversion, which we touched on earlier, becomes very sharp here. When we're dealing with someone who simply fails to exercise their capacity, the slacker on the couch, we offer correction. We appeal to the capacity they already have.
But now consider the viciously corrupt person, the one whose will is so perverse that they invert the rational basis, seeing harm as a good or kindness as a weakness. They approve of their perverse character. They are incapable of grasping the correct principle because their foundational disposition is warped.
You cannot simply correct them using rational dialogue because their internal map of what even counts as a reason is fundamentally broken.
You can't. They require conversion. This isn't a rational appeal. It's a deep fundamental shift in the foundation of their will. This might be achieved through emotional appeals, through art, through immersive experiences that shock the system, or perhaps profound existential experiences.
But the philosophical structure makes it clear that the effort required to change a perverse disposition is fundamentally different from the effort required to fix an imperfectly developed one.
It's a different project entirely. So the entire architecture of our normative thought hinges on these two distinct, yet completely interdependent states.
The specific, immediate realization of the will in the form of intentions, and the settled, enduring form of the will in the form of dispositions. This deep dive has shown us that the philosophical terrain of ought is far more structured than it initially appears. We found a true unity without uniformity in our normative thinking, and it's all anchored in this concept of the self-conscious will.
And that unified structure allows us to classify all our normative thoughts intelligibly. The specific thoughts about action, they rest on the foundation of intentions and the evaluative beliefs that are derived from their possibility.
And crucially, the generic thoughts, those practical principles that form the basis of our ethical life, are primarily settled dispositions of the will, which, in turn, provide the grounds for the evaluative beliefs we articulate as ethical theory.
The entire system is coherent because the reflective map must be derived from the objective territory of our practical capacities as a species.
That brings us to our final provocative question for you, the listener, to carry forward. We spent a significant amount of time detailing the philosophical argument that our capacity for practical reason grants us this unique a priori access to the concept of human being, the very subject of all our practical principles. If the foundational concepts defining our species are inherently tied to what we should do, what profound implications does this have for how we judge those who seem driven by fundamentally perverse or corrupt dispositions?
And following right on that idea, we established that some individuals might need conversion rather than correction because their disposition is broken at the root. If the concept of our species is inherently ethical, what are the limits of our obligation to try to convert those whose definition of the human good seems entirely competitive or fundamentally selfish?
How much effort must be invested in trying to shift the character of those whose actions defy the very principles we seem to grasp a priori? A question that moves from the architecture of the mind straight to the front lines of ethical engagement?
It does.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of normative thought. We'll see you on the next deep dive.